Whenever I talk about woodworking safety, people ask me about wearing gloves in the workshop. Some want to know if gloves are a good idea at all, while others want to know if cut-resistant gloves would make woodworking safer. Cut-resistant gloves have been around for a long time. About 25 years ago, I worked in a grocery store and they gave us gloves so we wouldn't cut ourselves in the produce department. I wasn't there long enough to see someone really put them to the test, but we all sort of took it for granted that as long as we had those gloves on, nothing could cut us. Well, nowadays we have the internet and there are people out there willing to test these things, sometimes on their own hands, just to get YouTube views. And what you learn is there is no such thing as a cut-proof glove, only cut-resistant. Of course, there are different levels of cut resistance. Many manufacturers give their gloves a rating between 1 and 5, but I found that to be meaningless in many cases. I've seen 5s that wouldn't hold up to a butter knife and others that would take a slice from a samurai sword. That's because you don't always know what they're made from. You usually can't go wrong with a Kevlar, which is a DuPont product used to make bulletproof vests. But just because it says it's made from Kevlar doesn't mean it is. Some underhanded brands use that word generically, sort of like Kleenex. So what about chainmail gloves? They've been used for centuries. But today's chainmail isn't what it used to be either. Most of it's little more than thick strands of steel wool weaved to look strong, but in reality it's no stronger than that fake Kevlar. But let's say you get your hands on some true Kevlar or Xylon or Dyneema or even some high-end chainmail gloves such as a butcher would have. Will they protect you from woodworking machines? No. A table saw will cut through a thick framing nail. No gloves are going to slow that down. And if you could stop a saw with any of these modern fabrics, you can bet they'd be selling their gloves in every woodworking store because the profits would be incredible. I know I'd buy them. I don't care if it's your table saw, your miter saw, your bandsaw, your router, angle grinder, anything with teeth powered by an electric motor is going to shred gloves. As one manufacturer puts it, cut-resistant gloves are the unicorns of the safety world. No, not magical, I mean entirely mythical. It's important that you understand that so that you don't get a false sense of security and do something you wouldn't normally do without the gloves on. Most cut-resistant gloves are made to protect you from slicing cuts with a knife edge. They're rated to ANSI standards, which measure how they stand up to a razor blade under a specific load, not a power tool. They're great for handling glass or sheet metal. If you have a good pair, and these are some of the better ones I found on Amazon that are still pretty affordable, you can use these for carving, whittling, or to defend yourself against an errant box cutter. These are all things we do in the shop, and it makes it well worth owning a good pair of cut-resistant gloves. But you have to understand their limitations. They'll hold up to accidental slicing cuts, but you can saw through them with repeated strokes. They may deflect a chisel or a carving gouge from a glancing blow, but not from a sharp stab, such as if the corner of a chisel or a narrow gouge pokes them hard. And they're no match for a powerful blow from a hatchet, or as I previously explained, any electrically powered tool. But don't they make gloves and clothing that will hold up to power tools like chainsaws? Yes, they do. They're usually made from multiple layers of Kevlar-like fibers that are meant to shred and clog up the saw's drive sprocket. Gloves made in this fashion are pretty thick and bulky, which is fine for a chainsaw handle, but they're not only impractical for woodworking, they may not work for that purpose at all, because table saws and other woodworking machines don't have the same drive sprocket mechanisms as a chainsaw. There's nothing to clog up and stop the blade. You're far more likely to just get wrapped up in the blade and have your hand pulled deeper in. And that leads to another question. Should gloves of any kind be worn in the workshop? This is something that's been hotly debated for years. Some folks like to wear gloves to protect their hands from splinters while handling rough lumber or plywood. But what happens if you catch a glove in one of the many rotary machines in your shop? The jointer, the lathe, the drill press, the router or table saw. It could be catastrophic. Some folks, and I actually used to be among them, argue that well-fitting gloves are fine because your hand should never be that close to the blade anyway. I even saw a popular video where someone dangles a glove on top of a table saw blade trying without success to get a catch, and that kind of reinforced in my mind that gloves were safe around these power tools. But then I started traveling around the country and meeting people online who have indeed caught gloves in table saws, jointers, bandsaws, lathes, you name it. You can argue the physics and the philosophy of it all day, but they can counter all those arguments by holding up a mangled hand. Real life trumps theory. It does happen. How does it happen though? How can a safety-conscious person get their hand close enough to a spinning blade to catch a well-fitting glove? Well, I can think of at least 3 ways. First, gloves cause complacency. They give a false sense of security. There's a lot of data to support this. People with gloves on put their fingers closer to danger than they would otherwise because they don't actually see how close their flesh is to that danger. It's a psychological effect that's experienced even by people who think they'd never do it themselves. Second, gloves can turn a close call into a disaster. Have you ever had a slip or a kickback or something that caused your hand to get close to but not hit a blade? You know that sick feeling you get because you knew you were this close to disaster? If you were wearing gloves, you may have been pulled to the rest of the way in. Finally, gloves can keep splinters or ragged edges from cutting into your hands, but those same splinters and ragged edges can also catch the glove and pull your hands into the danger zone. If you've ever had an accident with a power tool, you know it can occur lightning fast. It's easy to sit at our computers thinking, I'll just pull my hand away before it gets to the blade. That's not how the real world works, and 750,000 injured woodworkers every year will tell you that. Now, there are some exceptions to this rule. I sometimes wear gloves in the shop when I'm not using power tools, such as when handling lumber. And as we already discussed, I wear cut-resistant gloves when I use certain hand tools. I know some folks are going to argue that the protection gloves give outweigh the risk. I myself go back and forth on using gloves with certain tools like the angle grinder. There's a risk of getting caught in that disc if it touches a gloved hand, but what happens if the disc touches an ungloved hand? So I understand this eternal debate that goes on, but for me it comes down to taking the fewest risks possible, and that means no gloves while using almost all rotary power tools. Instead, I use tape. This stuff is used by vets and doctors to attach splints. It's coated with gauze that can be tightly wrapped around your fingers, even your palm, and it only sticks to itself, so it comes right off. It provides protection from splinters without the dangers of gloves. I'll put affiliate links for that tape and these cut-resistant gloves I like below in case you want to use what I use. I hope this has cleared up some of the questions many of you have about gloves in the workshop. MyWoodcutters.com is the sort of small business I like to support. Stefan is a great guy, and he can find you knives and cutters for almost any joiner, planer, shaper, or molding machine. And his are the best prices if you're planning to upgrade to a helical carbide cutter head. Please use the link below this video to check with him before you buy somewhere else. Some small businesses are just worth supporting. Wait, don't go yet. If you're new here, please subscribe and remember to ring the bell. I would really appreciate that. Give us a thumbs up, or better yet, leave us a comment. I always read them. And be sure to check out the latest issue of Stumpy Nubs Woodworking Journal. It's always packed with tips, tricks, and tutorials designed to make you a better woodworker.